Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected directors walks onto a talk show expecting a calm conversation about culture and instead ends up in one of the most heated debates The View has seen all year? That's exactly what happened when Ron Howard sat across from Joy Behar to discuss a question that cuts deep across America. Is the church becoming less relevant to modern families? The moment the topic landed on the table, the room tightened. Ron approached it with his usual calm, trying to talk about shifting values, changing schedules, and how families today find community in new places. But Joy wasn't having it. She came in sharp, pushing back on every point, insisting the church isn't losing relevance at all. People are simply losing discipline. Within minutes, the two were locked in a tense exchange that had the studio audience shifting in their seats. Ron tried to keep it grounded. Joy pushed for bold statements. Ron wanted nuance. Joy wanted accountability. And that clash of styles lit the fuse. What followed was a morning TV moment no one saw coming. Part cultural debate, part personal confession, and part emotional tug-of-war over what faith, family, and community really mean today. And it only got hotter from there. The show eased into the discussion with the kind of warmth that usually keeps The View's table steady in the first few minutes. Ron Howard sat comfortably in his chair, fingers loosely interlocked, that familiar calm expression on his face. He looked nothing like a man about to dive into a cultural minefield. Joy Behar, seated just a few feet away, offered him a polite smile, polite enough anyway, while the audience buzzed with the curiosity that comes when a Hollywood legend joins a conversation about American tradition. Sonny introduced the topic with a hopeful tone. "Ron, we know you've directed stories that explore family, community, small-town life. You've watched American culture shift over decades. What do you see happening right now with faith and the church? Are families moving away from it?" Ron nodded slowly, like he'd already spent plenty of time thinking it through. "I think families today still want connection," he said. "They want guidance, a sense of belonging. But the way they find that, it's changing. Some go to church, some find it in neighborhood groups, volunteer circles, even online communities. I don't think it's about rejecting faith. I think people are looking for spaces that fit their modern lives." It was an easy start, thoughtful, respectful, the sort of answer that let the room breathe. Sarah chimed in next, leaning in with interest. "Do you think it's a generational thing, like younger families just don't connect to institutions the same way their parents did?" Ron smiled. "Partly. My parents' generation saw church not only as a place of worship, but a town center. You met people there. You shared meals. You raised your kids alongside other families. Now the world is so fast. Parents are overwhelmed. Kids are pulled in 10 directions. Sometimes Sunday morning becomes the only quiet moment of the week." The audience hummed in agreement. Even Joy nodded, though her eyes hinted she was waiting for her moment to jump in. Ron continued, "And look, I don't think the church is disappearing, not at all. But families are choosing what feels authentic to them. Some find it in church, some find it elsewhere. The important thing is connection." It was a balanced take, careful and measured, the kind of answer that tries to soften divides rather than widen them. That's when Joy finally leaned forward, elbows on the table, her expression curious but edged. "Ron, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think it's that simple. People aren't drifting away because they're too busy. They're drifting because values have shifted, commitment has shifted. Families don't feel the same responsibility toward community institutions anymore." The tone sharpened without becoming hostile, yet the shift was noticeable. Ron kept his posture relaxed. "I think responsibility is still there," he said, "but I also think people want transparency. They want churches to evolve with them. When institutions stay rigid while the world moves, families look elsewhere." Whoopi watched the exchange with a small smile, sensing something heating up but choosing not to intervene. "So you're saying the institution hasn't kept up?" "I think in some cases, yes, and in others, it has. It depends on the community, the leadership, the willingness to adapt." Joy raised a brow. Or maybe people are just choosing convenience. You know, it's easier to skip church than go. It's easier to say you're spiritual than commit to anything organized. People like shortcuts. A few audience members murmured. The temperature rose just a little more. Ram didn't flinch. I think families today deal with pressure as previous generations didn't. Two working parents, kids overwhelmed with technology, a society that moves nonstop. If anything, they're juggling more, not less. Joy gave a tight smile. Maybe, or maybe we've gotten comfortable making excuses. The friendly tone was still there, but something underneath it had started to rumble. Ron crossed one leg over the other, staying composed. I don't think it's excuses, Joy. I think it's evolution. Families want meaning. They want community. But they want those things to make sense with their lives. And that's not unreasonable. Joy leaned back slightly, lips pursed. Well, it's certainly a conversation. And just like that, the early warmth had shifted into a subtle tension, two strong perspectives slowly stepping closer to the center of the debate. The real clash was only moments away. The shift from polite to pointed happened so smoothly that the audience barely realized when the room tightened. Joy adjusted her glasses, angled her body toward Ron, and locked in. The friendly tone from earlier was gone. What replaced it was the familiar spark that usually signals things are about to get loud on The View. Ron, Joy said, tapping the table for emphasis, you're talking about evolution like it's always a good thing. But what if what we're calling evolution is actually people letting go of values that hold society together? You've got families choosing soccer practice over church. You've got parents who think a podcast is the same thing as spiritual guidance. That's not evolution, that's fragmentation. Ron stayed calm, but his expression sharpened. I'm not saying everything modern is better. I'm saying families are trying to survive the world we built. The pace, the stress, the lack of support. If they look for community somewhere else, maybe that's a sign the church should ask why, not blame them. The audience reacted with a low ripple. Not applause, not boos, just that murmur that means people are choosing sides in real time. Joy wasn't backing down. But the church has been a stabilizing force for generations. When you take that away, people feel lost, families feel lost, and then we wonder why everyone's overwhelmed. Ron leaned forward slightly, but his voice stayed steady. And yet, many families do feel lost while going to church every week. Attendance doesn't automatically solve anything. Relevance is earned, Joy. It's not guaranteed. That line made the audience perk up. Sunny raised her hand, trying to mediate. Ron's saying the institution has to meet people where they are. And I'm saying people need to show up instead of expecting everything to be catered to them. Joy shot back before Sunny could finish. Ron let out a slow exhale. See, that's the thing. You're framing families as lazy. I'm framing them as overwhelmed. And I'm framing the church as a constant that shouldn't have to chase down people who'd rather scroll TikTok. That landed sharply enough that Sarah's eyebrows lifted. Ron shook his head. You're talking about a younger generation that feels judged before they even walk in the door. If they sense hypocrisy or rigidity, they won't stay. And who can blame them? They already have enough pressure from school, work, social media, everything. Joy leaned in, voice getting firmer. But Ron, at some point, people have to take responsibility. If you want moral guidance, if you want tradition, you show up. You don't wait for it to reinvent itself every 5 minutes. Ron gave a small, patient nod. Tradition has value, I agree. But institutions that refuse to evolve eventually collapse. That's just history. If churches want to stay meaningful, they have to speak to the world families actually live in, not the world we remember from 50 years ago. That pushed Joy right to the edge. So what? You're saying if churches don't modernize into social clubs with coffee bars and light shows, they deserve to fade away? Ron's answer cut through the air with surprising force for someone known for gentleness. I'm saying if they can't connect with real life, Real families and real struggles, they can't expect people to stay out of loyalty alone. The crowd reacted loudly, a mix of gasps and claps. Whoopi finally leaned in. Okay, this is getting interesting. But Joy wasn't done. Families need structure, Ron. They need places that don't bend to the mood of the culture. Churches used to offer that. Now people treat them like optional accessories. And maybe that's because too many churches held on to judgment instead of compassion. You want families to return? Make them feel welcomed, not lectured. Spoken like someone who hasn't been part of a church community in a long time. Ron didn't take the bait. Spoken like someone who listens when families tell them why they left. The studio went silent for a moment, that rare kind of silence where everyone feels something sharp land. The friendly beginning was long gone now, and the debate was only heading deeper into the fire. The tension in the studio thickened. Joy's voice had sharpened into that unmistakable edge she reserves for moments when she's about to push someone, and the audience could feel it. "Ron," she said, leaning forward, eyes wide, "you keep talking about evolution and adaptation, but what about accountability? What about the families who are struggling spiritually because their community isn't providing guidance? You make it sound like churches have to change everything to survive. That's not fair." Ron met her gaze steadily. "I'm not saying churches should abandon their core principles. I'm saying they have to understand the world families are living in today. Kids are stressed. Parents are stressed. If an institution isn't helping people navigate real life, it risks becoming irrelevant. And when families feel abandoned, they suffer." Joy's lips tightened, and the audience felt the shift. Abandoned? Families are struggling because they're not willing to commit. They want convenience, comfort, not responsibility. You can't blame the institution for that. "I'm not blaming them," Ron said, voice firm but measured. "I'm pointing out that the responsibility goes both ways. Churches have to show relevance, and families have to engage. When one side fails, the other side suffers." Sonny tried to interject, but Joy raised a hand, signaling she wasn't done. "Ron, you're being sentimental. You make it sound like families are victims of circumstance. Some of them are making choices. Some of them are prioritizing soccer, brunch, or screen time over spiritual growth. That's not abandonment, that's neglect." Ron's eyes softened, but there was a quiet intensity behind them. And yet some parents are trying to do it all: hold jobs, support kids, nurture marriages, be present, and the church doesn't meet them there. They don't feel understood, they're exhausted. And when that happens, people leave. That's all I'm saying. The audience murmured in agreement. Even Whoopi leaned forward, sensing the gravity of the moment. Joy's voice grew sharper. "So what? We just let them drift? We just excuse people for checking out because life is hard?" Ron shook his head slowly. "No, we don't excuse it. We highlight it. We make it visible. We talk about why people are leaving. And then, maybe we encourage churches to reconnect before it's too late. Families shouldn't have to choose between survival and spirituality." The silence that followed was heavy. The studio audience seemed to collectively hold its breath. Joy's face softened slightly, but only for a moment, before her old fire returned. "You think this is easy? You think churches can suddenly fix decades of cultural change because a few families are tired?" Ron's voice lowered, calm but piercing. "It's not easy. Nothing that matters ever is. But dismissing the problem won't solve it. Families are real people. They're struggling, and they need guidance that actually fits their lives. If the church ignores that, it loses its relevance, not because of failure, but because of neglect." A ripple of applause ran through the audience. Even Whoopi leaned forward, sensing the gravity of the moment. For the first time, the debate felt less like a clash of opinions and more like a mirror. One side defending tradition, one side pleading for understanding, and both revealing the emotional weight carried by families and communities across America. Joy exhaled, leaning back, her gaze softened. Maybe we've been too quick to blame families instead of looking at ourselves. That's not an easy thing to admit." Ron gave the faintest of smiles. Acknowledging it is the first step, and sometimes that's all you can do in one conversation. The studio hung on that tension, that fragile pause between conflict and understanding. The flashpoint had landed, raw and real, and no one in the room would forget it. The tension didn't ease after the emotional exchange. If anything, it tightened. The audience could sense a turning point coming, the kind of moment where a conversation stops being theoretical and starts exposing something personal. Ron sat up straighter, his calm shifting into a more grounded seriousness. Joy uncrossed her arms but kept her focus sharp, ready for what came next. Whoopi tried to lighten the mood. All right, we're walking into heavy territory, let's take a breath. But neither Ron nor Joy was stepping back. Joy started again, her tone controlled but intense. Look, Ron, you talk about families being overwhelmed. Fine, that's real. But let's stop pretending this is just about busy schedules. People have drifted because they don't want to be told what's right or wrong anymore. They want freedom without accountability, and you can't build strong communities with that mindset. Ron took a moment before responding, almost like he was deciding whether to open a door he normally kept closed. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter but carried more weight. Joy, families are not running from accountability, they're running from shame. The room fell still. Joy blinked. What does that mean? Ron leaned forward, elbows on the table. I grew up in a church-going family. I've seen the good it can do, but I've also seen people pushed away, good people, because they didn't fit someone's idea of perfect. I've seen single parents judged, teenagers judged, people struggling with mental health judged. When that happens, families don't feel supported. They feel rejected. Joy tilted her head, listening more carefully now. Ron continued. And when they leave, the story becomes they didn't care about values. No, many of them cared deeply. They just didn't feel safe. A murmur cut across the audience. Sonny looked up, moved by the honesty in his voice. Joy tapped her pen on the table. Ron, I hear that, but the church isn't supposed to make everything comfortable. It's supposed to challenge people. Ron nodded. Challenge, yes. Condemn, no. There's a difference. And some families know that difference too well. The weight of that line hit everyone at the table. Even Joy stopped for a moment, studying him. It was clear he wasn't speaking in hypotheticals anymore. Ron, she said softly, are you talking about someone you know? For the first time all morning, Ron hesitated. Then he gave a small nod. A family close to mine. They were faithful their whole lives. Their daughter made a mistake, one that shouldn't define her, and instead of being supported, they were quietly pushed aside. They stopped going. Not because they wanted to leave their church, but because they felt like their church left them. Sarah's hand went to her chest. The audience fell into a hush. Joy swallowed, her voice gentler. That's awful, but that's one community, not all churches. Ram nodded again. I agree, many churches are doing beautiful work. Many leaders are compassionate. I'm not painting them all with one brush. But when families feel judged, when they feel unheard, the damage becomes generational. Kids grow up thinking the church is a place that won't accept them unless they're perfect. And that's the danger. Joy leaned forward, intensity returning but softened. So you're saying the church needs to take a hard look at itself? Ron met her eyes. I'm saying we all do. Institutions, families, communities, everyone. If the church wants to stay relevant, it has to open its doors wider, not close them tighter. Joy took a deep breath. And families have to show up honest, not looking for perfection, but connection. Ron nodded. Exactly. That's when Joy added something that surprised even her coworkers. Maybe we've been too quick to blame people for walking away. Maybe we should ask what made them feel like they had to. The audience applauded, loud enough that Ron looked slightly taken aback. Joy, still focused on him, said quietly, "You should have said that at the beginning. Would have saved us a lot of yelling." Ron cracked a small smile. "I'm a storyteller. I build to the ending." Even Whoopi laughed at that. But beneath the humor, the table had reached something raw, something important. The breaking point hadn't shattered them. It exposed what the argument had been circling around the whole time. Families aren't abandoning faith. They're searching for a place where they feel seen. And for the first time all morning, Ron and Joy looked less like opponents and more like two people finally seeing the same truth from different angles.
The studio felt different after that last exchange. Softer, quieter. Like everyone, hosts, audience, even Ron and Joy, needed a moment to let the weight of the conversation settle. Arguments about tradition and modern life usually spark noise, but this one left something else behind. A kind of reflection that pushed people inward. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, letting out a measured breath. "Well," she said, "I think we hit on something important today. Not just about the church, but about what families need and how complicated that can be." Ron nodded, hands clasped. Everyone wants the same thing at the end of the day. Meaning, support, a place where they don't feel alone. Whether that comes from a church, a community center, a neighborhood group, or something else, it only matters that people feel connected. Joy looked at him with a calmer expression than before. "And accountability matters too," she added quietly. "But maybe we forget sometimes that the people we expect to show up are carrying more than we can see." Ron offered a gentle smile. "Maybe the answer isn't choosing one side. Maybe it's recognizing that both things can be true. Families can be overwhelmed, and institutions can adapt. And somewhere in the middle, you meet." That line drew a soft applause from the audience, the kind that says people aren't just reacting, they're agreeing. Sonny leaned into the table. "It's clear families today are looking for places that feel authentic. Maybe the bigger question isn't whether the church is becoming less relevant, but whether all of us, churches, communities, even individuals, are willing to step into the needs of modern life instead of holding on to old expectations." Sarah nodded. "Because relevance isn't about popularity, it's about connection." Joy, still looking thoughtful, turned to Ron. "I'll give you this. You made me think about the judgment part. I grew up seeing churches as pillars, but you're right. You lose people if they don't feel safe. No institution survives that." Ron dipped his head slightly. "And you reminded me that commitment matters. Tradition still matters. We shouldn't lose that either." The two shared a small, surprisingly warm smile, such a contrast to the earlier sparks that even the audience reacted with soft laughter. Whoopi wrapped it up with her usual grounded charm. "Look, we're living in a world that changes fast. Families are trying to keep up, churches are trying to keep up. Sometimes they meet, sometimes they miss each other, but conversations like this one, they help us understand the bridge between past and present." The camera panned across the table as Ron relaxed back into his seat, and Joy exhaled with a rare, thoughtful grin. The clash had started as a debate about relevance, but it ended as something more, human. A reminder that families aren't turning away from meaning, they're searching for it in ways that fit their lives. And whether it's the church or another community that steps in, one truth remains: people stay where they feel valued. As the credits music swelled, the energy in the studio shifted from confrontation to clarity. A tough topic had brought out tension, honesty, and a moment of real understanding. Exactly the kind of moment that keeps the view buzzing long after the cameras stop rolling.